all the same day in, day out for me. It's all the same day in, day out for me.
Hello, friends. Welcome to a podcast where you can speak your truth and Loco will listen. My name is Jake Loco. Thank you for being here at the Loco Listens podcast. Stay tuned for a great episode, and please feel free to stick around for the outro at the end where I will give you my thoughts and reflections on this fantastic discussion. Enjoy, and thank you again for being with us. All right, my friends, welcome back. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to introduce my new friend, Marcos. Marcos is also known as Trusted Source 444 on Instagram. He describes himself as a self-accused jack of many beliefs. He's just trying to sharpen his mind against illusion, which there's plenty of that. Become more familiar with persuasion, which is a great idea no matter who you are. And he wants to connect his mind of a conspiracy theorist with his love for psychology and spirituality. Definitely something I can relate to. Marcos is also currently a counseling student working towards his master's. I'm looking forward to diving into it, man. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Marcos. How's it going today?
It's all good. Chilling in the forest. I'm fairly isolated myself for this one. Surprisingly good connection. As you said earlier, you can always find plenty of connection in the forest.
Yeah. There's no Wi-Fi out there, but there's plenty of connection. And I want to ask you first off, our ritual question on the Local Listens podcast is, Marcos, when did you begin to speak your truth?
Speaking my truth started kind of coming around 2017. I was born on 1999, so my birthday kind of matches with the year, my age matches with the year. So I was 17, 2017, and life kind of fell apart in a way that I didn't feel like my relationships were going, like my relationships with my family were going well. And what found me was my first introduction to spirituality and to counseling was a teacher named Teal Swan, who she posts a lot of both content that intermingles counseling with spiritual themes and stuff that's been very effective for me. And that is what I use to actually have a better handle on how I react to my day-to-day life, how I understand my own spirituality, because I used to be Christian. But the idea of being set up for a choice or for a path for one lifetime didn't quite make much sense for an infinite God. And now I would say I've been able to be more relaxed, a much better version of myself thanks to her, thanks to this exposure and understanding more about different spiritualities, different niches of both the new age and the old ways. And my only issue is I haven't gotten ingrained into one of them quite yet.
Well, I want to ask you a bit more about Teal Swan. I've definitely listened to her quite a lot, and she has a wonderful voice, by the way. Something about listening to her seems very balanced, and I definitely feel like she does have a lot of insightful and definitely unique ideas to offer to her audience. And if you were to introduce someone to Teal Swan who has never listened to her before, how would you describe the takeaways that you got out of listening to her? And what other perhaps resources might you recommend if someone was also interested?
She has made it clear that although she has quite the ability to see kind of beyond the veil, she has extrasensory perception, so she's able to see spiritual matters quite easily. And what she's done and what you can get and what she's given to the world was that she learned counseling and learned a way of affecting the emotional, the mental, the spiritual body such that she can figure out and help heal an old wound or a trauma of a person who comes to her with that help. And she does take the time to understand the person. She listens, and when she makes videos, what she does is that she takes a trauma
Mm,
and she explores it into a spiritual depth and into an emotional depth and into a historical depth, and gives various tips on each video of
mm.
what can be done to address the issue and how it's addressed, or how you can recognize it as well.
Right on, right on. So it's nice that she always offers those sort of practical applications, like we talked about earlier. You know, the fact that you can listen to Teal, or to listen to the discussions that she's having with other people, and to come away with it feeling like you're more prepared to deal with whatever trauma might be on your plate at that time. But I'm curious, since you're a student of this clinical school, what has it been like to see the ideas clashing between perhaps what Teal Swan discusses, which may not be necessarily aligned with all the textbooks or the DSM, if you will?
One of the interesting things that captured me, actually, now that I am learning about counseling, is how much she integrated correctly and accurately.
Mm,
So the dependency styles that she talks about, that everybody knows about, seems nowadays: codependency,
mm,
independence, interdependence. Those are based on, I believe, some work by an author named Ainsworth, and
mm.
attachment definitely was actually by the same author, Ainsworth, who wrote about how our connections with our mothers at birth
Mm,
and for a few years after that really determines how we relate to the entire world
yeah.
before, and how we presume it to be safe or to be helpful to us before
Mm,
we even get to know it. And
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
was surprisingly, yeah, she talks about it directly. She gives these terms as they relate to counseling, as well as how she uses them in a spiritual sense. So that, on top of different types of relationships, narcissism, uh, ego, the shadow,
Mm,
she integrates even parts of Jungian psychology. And uh, I haven't explored Jungian very much, but
okay.
but I've been able to make quite a bit of sense from it, from both her and from the learning about you and I. We talked about him, Jordan Peterson. We both
Oh, yeah.
listened to Jordan
Jordan loves
Peterson. We
Jung.
kind of
Yeah.
mentioned that in our earlier talks, but
Hmm.
um, learning more about, yeah, learning from Jordan helped me also understand about Jung more. And so I would say that she's really on point with that.
Mm,
And then other influences, the three main influences on me that I would say that have been on my journey were Teal Swan first. Second is Leo Gura from actualized.org.
okay.
He's surprisingly, his take on things were surprisingly materialistic slash non-spiritual for most of his YouTube career. And then he learned to explore God, and now his
Mm,
teachings have been able to integrate both the practical realm of money making and coping
mm.
and dealing with trauma, to now also experimenting with different concepts on a spiritual plane and in a
Interesting.
philosophical plane.
Very
He's
interesting.
quite roundabout in his content.
Mm,
Third, Jordan Peterson. Fourth, there was a fella named Chris the Esoteric
mm.
on Instagram who had a podcast named This Esoteric Life, but unfortunately he's either taking it down or that he's but I can still you can still probably text him. He taught quite a bit about Qigong.
Mm. Okay. Interesting. So,
And from him I learned how to sell my body more. That's it.
gotcha. Excellent. Okay. So Qigong and of course Jordan Peterson. I want to back up really quick and clarify that first name was Leo What was his last name? Leo
Leo Gura,
Gura.
Gura.
Gura. Leo Gura.
Yes.
Okay. Kind of like guru with an A. So Leo Gura. Okay. And then
Yeah.
this Qigong teacher, I definitely want to dive into that a bit later. But since we brought up this duality between the materialism, that lifestyle or that mindset, and then the more spiritual and I suppose esoteric side of existence, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background, especially considering that you referred to yourself earlier as someone who used to be a Christian? I'd like to explore that a little bit. So would you like to tell us about sort of your personal spiritual history?
Yes. So the first part of this is that I'm born of a pastor. My mom is a Methodist pastor, and my stepfather eventually took up becoming a Methodist pastor as well. And Methodism is really just, I guess you could say their boon is that they do a lot of supporting the community.
Nice.
And so they put that basically at the forefront of wherever they do ministry. From there, I really learned so much about like all the stories of the Bible. I was, the knowledgeable kid in Sunday school and all these things. But, eventually, you'd come to an age where you have to ask yourself, oh, well, there's these other beliefs, or there's materialism, atheism. Why not choose those paths? Yes. Why do we have to lead a path to a salvation? And I struggle with that, but I kind of, left it behind and said, well, look, there's much better things ahead for a Christian that does what they are following. Or, that meme, like, what would be the better outcome if you, in both cases, if you did or didn't go to hell, if you did or didn't go to heaven, if you did or didn't believe in God, what could be your outcomes? And either nothing happened or you went to heaven, or nothing happened or you went to hell. And it's like, oh, well, I guess that's why I should stick to being Christian, right? Well, I mean, it is an infinite world, an infinite universe around here. And I couldn't really take that quite seriously until, like I said, I had this little bit of a crisis. And, the person who helped me the most was the person who had these beliefs. And I thought, well, I did already believe in miracles, and part of me always wanted to believe in magic, but like, how in the world would I integrate all this stuff? The way she explained it, and even also the way Leo Gura explained it, made sense to me, that there is so much more that we can't fathom, and to think that we can put a limit on what God is, it seems unrealistic. The way I just couldn't make sense of it anymore. I said, you know what? I tried to be Christian, but this concept of holding on to the idea that I am not enough until I do such and such, until I follow this path, until I give my life up for something that, is also noble, but it had me running at a deficit. And it might have been that I was getting the wrong lesson, which I kind of had to think about later. But even as I was learning, because, Jordan Peterson, I was learning from him for a minute, and he kind of had me going like, well, there are virtues to this Christian tradition, but also the way about of going and learning on these seemed to deal with integrating both the collective and the individual, both serving the other and serving the self. And it's on the self where we connect with the divine.
Well said. Yeah, Jordan Peterson, absolutely, definitely. Jordan Peterson, for me personally, I'm glad that you brought him up, because he has definitely revived a sense of curiosity about Christianity, but he's also brought in so many other philosophical and psychological concepts. Like when you say the collective, that automatically reminds me of Carl Jung because of the collective unconscious or the shadow and these
The collective unconscious as well.
yeah. So it sounds like to me, and please feel free to guide this since this is since we're getting into your background here, but it sounds like around 2017, as you had mentioned, there was a pivot, and I was wondering if you could describe where you were, I guess, mentally, spiritually, if you'd like, and then where did you pivot to, or once you discovered people like Teal Swan or Jordan Peterson, what was this pivot like for you?
This pivot was dealing with coming to terms with how I understood a good relationship with both
Mm,
myself and my anxieties, and also, with my parents.
mm-hmm,
Uh, it wasn't that they were the worst parents; they were great parents. But they pass on their anxieties like 90% of parents.
mm-hmm.
They pass on their subtle insecurities like most
Right.
parents do,
Yeah.
and eventually, what would have been just one person, coming to a panic attack was the both of us.
Mm,
And I suddenly realized, like, I am such an anxious person. I can't let go of so many things. I need to be in control all the time.
mm,
And I need to, and my thoughts run wild. I can't even seem to be in control of my own thinking
mm.
and my own feelings. And that searching on the internet, on YouTube,
Yeah.
on how to deal with this stuff is what
Mm,
kind of got me to Teal Swan. She was one of the videos that popped up, and I was trying to find kind of like a spiritual voice,
mm-hmm,
um, maybe one that was probably religious, because I thought, oh well, this person, they might have something to share
mm,
and something in common with me, and we did have something in common, just not the way I expected. But learning from her, learning concepts that started like yeah, Jung archetypes, the shadow, the self, the unconscious, made a lot of sense to me. The way she spoke about practical techniques to take control of overthinking
mm,
made sense to me, and I used them, and they worked. Uh, Techniques she gave on letting go, and
mm,
on being forgiving, and on practicing being a more mindful person. They helped me, and they've transformed me, and giving myself self, and also techniques for self love. These really awakened me to how much better of a relationship I can have with myself and my thoughts and my mind, and
mm.
with others. And so yeah, that was kind of how that was how I made sense of my spiritual pivot. It really brought me towards understanding spirituality as a whole.
Mm.
Sorry if audio cut off for a moment.
No, that was great. Yeah,
Uh,
and that was a really cool breakdown, Marcos. And I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to become aware of whatever the anxieties were manifesting for you, and then applying what you've been learning and finding tools and tricks and practices or rituals that can help you reverse those changes or to establish better habits. And one thing that you brought up earlier was qigong. So would you like to get into how you were introduced to qigong, and maybe a little bit about what qigong is and why it's appealed to you in this particular way?
Qigong has been a way of healing and mastering. It's a segment of practice that deals with mastering the body, so that you can eventually alchemize the energies, or rather the chi, because actually the word chi doesn't quite align with the word energy the way it's used over there. But
Mm,
um, that it's to it's a practice that leads into eventually utilizing the chi, so that in a very efficient way, so that your body can experience a longer life,
Mm-hmm.
a much better resilient body is formed so
Mm-hmm.
that you can, live longer, so you
Right.
can have more potency, you can have more stillness of mind.
Mm.
It all really points to a very, peak form of being quite sturdy. If you
Mm.
can think of the element of earth, you're making your body full up of still energy
Mm.
that you can then, when you need to, exercise into action, rather than have your mind spending energy all day,
Mm-hmm.
have your body and your anxieties live in your body in such a way that it leaks chi.
Mm.
They understand imagination and overactive thinking as ways that chi is released from our body.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about overthinking or having like a charged up nervous system, like being in fight or flight, or having too many ruminating thoughts. These types of things will
Yes,
leak
exactly.
out chi.
Yes. So um, when you're younger and you're kind of your body's kind of expectant for sexual activities, your body's quite ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
Your energy can handle, a sexual interaction.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do it too much and or do it in older ages, it's kind of considered uh, being a drain on the energy, drain on your chi. Did it cut out again?
Nope, you're okay. And I also want to
No.
ask you,
Okay.
I'm very familiar with that concept in Taoism, especially. And have you ever heard of Montauk Chia?
Actually, I haven't yet.
Okay, so Montauk Chia is a
What do you mean by
Taoist
this?
master he's been famous for teaching these courses. He does like workshops and lectures. It's all about the functioning of sexual energy. So again, like you were saying, and I guess the more westernized version of this line of thinking, which is not the same at all as Taoism, but it's like no fap, or it's just in general quitting porn or like overcoming porn addiction, which I think recently in 2020, like I know myself personally, I was definitely vulnerable to this behavior a lot in 2021. And overcoming that has made huge progress in other areas of my life. Like being charismatic seems to depend on having a healthy amount of chi and being confident and having the energy to do things and not to go home and smoke weed every day and just relax, but no, to enjoy life and to get a lot out of it. So it's interesting that you bring up chi because I think on an esoteric level, it's something that people could miss or overlook. So I'm curious, were there any other, besides Qi Gong, is there anything else that you can think of that has been helping you to get through, say, school, to balance your responsibilities? What other practices do you have that you'd like to share with us about?
There were seasons
Mm.
where I was interested in witchcraft, as
Mm.
but I learned a teeny tiny bit about how witches who were semi-modern, and they were trying to like bring back old European traditions of witchcraft. And there's also Santeria, but I never really got into Santeria. I got into understanding witchcraft, and I
Mm.
got into understanding um, uh, more into archetypes than I let on earlier. I did say I wasn't sure that I learned very much about Jung, but I did learn quite a bit about archetypes when I was
Mm.
learning from Jordan Peterson. I went
Right,
and
right.
explored and tried to meditate on certain archetypes, like
Mm-hmm.
the warrior, like the scientist slash sage,
Mm.
and or the king, trying to see how these make sense in my feeling around my relationships, and how, for example, I did feel kind of a gap towards my fatherly side and my
Mm.
discipline side. And so I would try to tap into the king archetype so that I could be more organized and decisive about what it is that needed to be done.
Right on, right on. Yeah, it's really fascinating the way Jordan Peterson has introduced to so many people these archetypal concepts or the other Jungian ideas that are now, it seems to be, much more popular than I had remembered. So I got to thank Jordan Peterson for that. Despite what people may say about him, he definitely made a very positive influence on my life. And I think one day, Marcos, you and I could do a deep dive into 12 Rules or some of his other works. That would be a lot of fun. But the next thing I want to ask you about deals with your Instagram name. So your Instagram name is Trusted Source 444 at Trusted Source 444. So when I think about that, it seems like the concept of a trusted source has changed a lot since 2020. So what are your feelings recently on stories coming out, and are there any in particular that stand out to you that you might want to consider diving into today?
The very first guy that comes to mind when you ask that was Mr. Anthony B. Fauci.
Mm.
I actually somewhat recently saw a clip of him talking about a different disease before this pandemic, where he was saying deliberately, if you were infected, you have no need to take a
Seen
vaccine.
that. Yep. You have the best vaccine available is natural immunity.
Yes, yes, exactly. And how he kind of flipped that script.
Mm.
He went back in a way. I was going to say he went back on his word, but he didn't quite make a word. He just
Mm.
followed a script, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
He followed the interest of medical medical money, and went and said what people wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently people wanted, or at least the pharmaceutical companies wanted a reason to sell out a whole bunch of vaccines, and they got one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, the understanding of trusted source, the understanding of how who we trust for our news, who we trust for truthful information,
Mm-hmm.
for what we should be thinking of, for what we should be thinking about, or what we should acknowledge more versus what should be kept behind, and or things that are censored, and people who choose to say or are told to say uh, something or to not say something else on a TV or uh, as representatives of an organization.
Right. There's certain topics that
These
people
are,
seem to be not allowed to get into when they are represented by, say, Pfizer or, any of the other very, very wealthy companies that can pay people to read these scripts, basically, like you're saying.
yes, and if they are suddenly, if their employer or if their boss or whoever are suddenly changing, their vision to what they want the other people to see,
Mm.
then who is the speaker to get in the way? I mean, they would have to quit if they wanted to say something otherwise, or
Mm.
like I said, or risk getting fired. Um, so you could that's kind of like probably what brought up the all this abundance of new news sources, online news sources,
Mm-hmm.
online articles and podcasts that are kind of counterculture nowadays, because of how culture kind of made itself counter to the truth
Mm-hmm.
on some aspects, on some topics. And trusted source was really my most recent name. There's actually a little funny story to that. I was commenting to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I was commenting on a news Instagram page,
Mm-hmm.
and I was saying, such and such about vaccine, and the person who responded to me was like, you literally have conspiracy in your name, because my name on Instagram before this was Calm Conspiracy,
Calm
which
conspiracy.
kind of for me meant to reflect the idea of, of having a level head when you're entering into a conspiracy or into the conspiracy community. Yeah, so my name was Calm Conspiracy, and the person pointed out, like, your name is literally Calm Conspiracy. Like, I'm not gonna basically, I'm not gonna understand. I'm not gonna take what you're saying as true.
Mm.
You're obviously a conspiracy theorist. And so I just said, check again. And I had already changed my name to Trusted Source
There you go. Yeah, you got him there. You got him there. It's like, oh, well, now you're a trusted source, so perhaps I could consider your opinions.
Yes, exactly. And it kind of it just surprised me in that moment. Like, well,
Mm,
you couldn't even give my statement a thinking or a thought or an argument or a counter indication. You just said, no, you are what your name is,
mm.
and you aren't worth listening to. And it's like, well, who told you that? And who said that was a good idea to begin with?
Right, right. I mean, I'm happy
And
that
that's
you
what we're
were.
being told nowadays too.
Yeah, well, I'm curious though. So when you first decided to make this account called Calm Conspiracy, was this before COVID? Because I know that conspiracies have been around forever, it seems. So when you're thinking about Calm Conspiracy and where that idea comes from, can you tell us a little bit about where your head was at when that was first created?
Yeah, so actually this was a personal account, but
Hmm.
I when I decided to switch over and make it more of a public account, even though right now it's still somewhat private, but when I decided to turn it into a conspiracy account, I should say, I took down quite a few of some of my personal
Mm.
media on there, and I left what I thought was either indicative or was kind of funny, or maybe my cats. I think I left some of my cats
Gotta
down
leave
on
the
there.
cats. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And the just changed the name and changed the profile picture, and um, I put Calm Conspiracy because I knew I had to reflect even to my friends
Mm.
that because I did build this, I did change it over during the pandemic. I wanted to reflect to my friends that I'm now what you would call a conspiracy because of what I believe in.
Mm.
Um, they they I didn't go out to my followers, my friends who follow me directly and say, hey, this whole thing is a sham.
Mm.
This stuff that they're saying about COVID and stuff, like, it's not holding up. No, I thought, well, there's no better way to do it than to just flip the name and change my
I think it's
profile picture.
brilliant,
My name,
honestly.
I think my first name is still somewhere on there. I think it might be in the bio, but
Hmm.
um, it was still like, this is a time when I think not only is it important for me to declare that I am at a different stance on this whole pandemic issue, but I also
Mm.
wanted to dedicate my posting and my page at that time to uh, telling others about what is going wrong and what I was seeing wrong. And I did that. I stopped. I didn't even post much personal stuff anyway. I was already posting a decent amount of conspiracy and spirituality, because those two for me, they have a beautiful intersection. When you think about how people think about the dark cabal, or some think of QAnon,
Right.
or like the elites worshiping the devil or stuff,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, it's not necessarily that I believe that stuff, but there are some folks that I've been able to connect up with, and quite a few quite a few guys actually that I'm in a group chat with, that we see this stuff as both a spiritual battle and a battle of over people,
Absolutely.
over ideology. And so I dedicated myself so that I could actually uh, feel more sure of myself as well, that this is what I want to do. This is actually becoming, well, not only becoming things, and it could get worse, and I wanted to tell everyone about it. I
Mm.
wanted to tell uh, what could happen if we follow this route. Could there be inflation because of the paychecks coming in?
Hmm.
Could there be the jab the jab microchip? Could there be fourth or fifth or boosters to this whole scenario, and you'll never be fully vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, when the vaccines were first rolled out, and not many people noticed, but there were already four lines on the vaccine card. So it seems like the boosters were planned from the beginning. You know, this was a business model that, when executed the way that it was, with the media propaganda behind it to pump it up and put it on this pedestal, like, you know, when you have Big Bird and Elmo selling your product, like, it's gonna sell, and it sure has. So I'm curious now, when we pivot away from COVID into what comes next. A lot of people ask me, hey, Jake, where do you see us going? And I do automatically think of that Pfizer montage, you know, brought to you by Pfizer. And it's just over and over again. And it's so obvious how much influence that this one company has. So that's what I think of, more of a technocracy, or, you know, an attempt for corporations to gobble up as much power as they possibly can, like BlackRock and Vanguard have been doing. And there seems to be like some kind of breaking point that we might hit eventually, but hopefully in a peaceful way. So where do you see the next, let's say the next decade? How are we going to get through the 2020s? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
You know, I've been trying to connect with some of the things that some of the tools that I use, or I shouldn't say tools, but I mean some of the people that I tend to listen to nowadays for future advice are psychics, astrologers, and conspiracy theorists. Because it seems that conspiracy theorists tend to have quite a lot of, I guess, when it comes to personality, I can kind of notice that they have something in common with, you know, trying to plan everything out there, and they can tend to be quite anxious.
Yeah.
But that kind of lends to their both paranoia and creativity, which lends to their ability to formulate different paths forward. The problem is that they tend to be quite negative.
Yeah.
Then, you know, psychics, because, you know, who doesn't want to listen to a good psychic? And then astrologers, because, you know, actually, you know, I had one astrologer that I liked listening to, but she was kind of she was silenced. She was shadow banned off of Instagram in a way. So she kind of just got off and went and did her own thing on a different website. And I didn't get to follow her off of there, but she mentioned a lot about, you know, big changes during the pandemic, and they kind of reflected what was going on in the planets and stuff. So, I mean, to me, she was rather reliable. But for what I see, for what I think is going on, you probably see a decent amount of people nowadays trying to buy an electric car of sorts. There might be, you know, a weaning off of the oil tit. We're not going to be, a good number of us aren't going to be buying oil things anymore, and some of us are going to be buying things that still run on, you know, engines, as to say.
Yeah.
Engines that have that require combustion. Might be quite a few more electric cars on the road. I don't know if people are still anxious about the idea of self-driving cars, but I think transportation, that's kind of how things are going. As for awards, I mean, everything seems to be out in the air right now. It doesn't seem like it seems like we're trying, like the U.S. is trying to keep more continuous, subtle wars across the world nowadays.
Yeah.
The U.S. or Russia or both. I don't know. I wish I could look into both more easily.
As far as a war goes, you know, any war in general, but the modern war that we're seeing now is one of the most expensive events that we've ever seen. There's billions of dollars being flown into these places to be spent on bullets and firepower, and it's definitely concerning for sure.
Yeah, bullets, firepower, people who spent on trying to hack each other, trying to get into each other's infrastructure. All this stuff, so much spending, so much spending. I can't imagine that stopping. I'm sure. I'll tell you that much. Either people will wake up to the inflation that's happening and realize, well, we got to do something. And then they have to be given a reason. They'll probably be given a reason why the inflation is going. So far, the first reason has been, the war between Ukraine and Russia. But if the war continues, they'll probably the inflation might go down a bit if people keep supporting it, and if people don't, well, then the inflation will keep going. And if the war keeps going, then people will still blame Russia, and either that, or we can reach a critical mass where everybody finds out, like, hey, who's the biggest spender of dollars in our economy? And what's that on? Maybe it's the guy who never runs out of money, the Federal Reserve, the U.S., trying to get them down. I'm surprised, honestly. I did have hopes for how the pandemic was going to slow down and or stop. And it took a little longer, but eventually happened, at least for different states in the U.S. Some of us,
I mean, even here in Connecticut, it's pretty much over. I mean, I work in a high school, and we had the whole vaccine mandate, which I was able to get religious exemption for, but the mask mandate was only recently lifted in March, and it wasn't immediately in March either. It was like a week or two into March that we slowly, cautiously decided to take off those masks. So yeah, COVID definitely has slowed down even in these blue states, I suppose. But there's now something else happening, right? Like COVID has slowed down, and now this other event has ramped up. It's like we couldn't get a break, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be one thing or another. Look over here, look over there, but not at where the money's flowing. And even from whether that's Ghislaine Maxwell's, this trial or this court date, or someone else getting arrested, something tends to just happen all of a sudden, and our eyes, the public's eyes, just can't stay away. But now that the pandemic is slowing down, it's kind of, I see that, like, people are noticeably disappointed at how little it impacted their lives in terms of actual, like, related to illness.
Right. Yeah.
The way they're starting to reflect on how much COVID as a disease affected their lives versus the pandemic as a society affected their lives, and being able to distinguish between those two, it's difficult, and some of us probably aren't even going to let it go. Some of us are probably going to start to, for example, I think some of the people I know who were really sticklers about this pandemic, they've really identified themselves more as a clean freak now, as to why they care so much about wearing masks and about sanitizing. And even though I know for sure that they weren't a clean freak before this pandemic, but being duped into behaving the way we have, we have to find ways to explain it, or we have to find ways to feel like we weren't totally, like, there was something that we did right. And and people, we need a way through.
What do you think, Marcos? So the fact that, of course, we deal with illness every year, like there's a cyclical flu season that we always have, or there's an allergy season, these things happen every single year. But this particular cycle, which lasted more than a season, it was really two almost 3 years of this BS that I would say, this pandemic. So when you think about that, it seems to be that there was a psyop of massive proportions that literally changed people's behaviors inside and out. And it seems like anyone who wasn't a hypochondriac or a clean freak before this pandemic, anyone who has become a hypochondriac and a clean freak after this pandemic, seems like it was a direct result of the media and these quote unquote trusted sources. So I'm curious, now that we've seen sort of the twilight of hopefully another variant isn't gonna, ramp up, but we can only be hopeful and optimistic, I suppose. If this is the twilight of the COVID era and we're gonna move on to something much more complex. But anyways, Marcos,
Mm-hmm.
now that we're transitioning towards the conclusion of this episode on the Local Listens podcast, I want to thank you again for being here. And I wanted to ask you about a very popular phrase that circles around this community, this conspiracy or spirituality, or the term that I've been loving recently is the conspirituality community. So the idea is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Marcos, that conspiracy usually leads to spirituality in some way, or vice versa. So what are your thoughts on the relationship between spirituality and conspiracy theories, and how does that inform you when you're looking ahead into the future?
The spirit of conspiracy you could kind of associate, as mentioned before, you can associate with the ability to be creatively anxious, thoughtfully anxious, which I've been guilty of before, but I didn't realize this is something we all kind of have in common in this
Mm-hmm.
community, is that in the conspiracy community is that we expect something bad to happen. We expect, especially when it comes to governments, like our trust's been shaken before something could go bad. And then we meet up with the spiritual community, kind of trying to teach us uh, to be more open-minded.
Mm.
Things that are synchronistic, things that are out of our control. We can now, by putting these two together, we can deal with things better. We can also expect things and deal with the worst situations, because we can think up the worst situations.
Mm.
They definitely go together because, like I said, they deal with openness. If a person is much more open, and that's one of 5 big personality traits of when you think of trait
Mm.
theory in psychology. Openness relates to how diverse and how open you are to diverse ideas and diverse opinions, and you also tend to open your mind to what could happen.
Mm.
And if you had a rigid spirituality and a rigid expectation of your reality before you learned about conspiracies, after you learn about them, it seems that you tend to be much more open-minded about
Mm.
what could happen and what could be happening beyond your eyes, beyond your experience. And
Mm.
so I think that tends to happen pretty quickly if you start with conspiracy. But if you start with spirituality, I don't know I'm not quite sure what to say about that, because they tend to be a little bit, like I said, like we said, a little bit more grounded,
Mm.
but also surprisingly open. And even if someone is entering spirituality, say because they're trying to leave behind their anxious past, so they're trying
Mm.
to make better of their mind, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to start, uh, you know, experimenting with conspiracy, because conspiracy is kind of uncomfortable. And well, if you're doing good in spirituality, if spirituality is also uncomfortable. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's yeah, I was mentioning these groups that were already quite spiritual, but weren't noticing how the pandemic was being manipulated, rather than being valid. And earlier I said, witches. I noticed which communities just slightly lean more towards trusting this whole thing. And I can't blame them. We were
Mm.
affected on all sides. All media was sent towards trying to normalize this new issue.
Mm.
And you sometimes, in order to make our life simple, our minds kind of just like divide things neatly into piles and say, oh well, this is the world and this is spiritual, and
Mm.
or this is my people and I need to defend and I need to be there for them, and I can't be there for them if I disagree with them, and stuff like that. And I don't know what pressures all these people went through, but Um, I, uh, they still deserve your attention, your interest.
Mm.
You never know.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point, Marcos, because it seems to be a real challenge for people to find ways to communicate with those who may not agree with them necessarily. So when you're learning in your counseling courses and your education that you're currently going through now, what can you offer to people who might be in the position, say, I think of Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and just the whole idea of his podcast being that it's hard to talk about these things sometimes because, well, people might automatically jump to conclusions or they might label you certain things. So, what kinds of communication strategies might help people remain calm when they're dealing with conspiracy or disagreement?
See if you can try to get around saying you're wrong or you're not seeing this, or either saying, well, I think this, or I think this doesn't meet here.
Hmm.
And as long as you can focus on the problem rather than on the person, you can help the other person be less defensive about what you've got to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Marcos. I'm
You
glad that
hold on
you
to it.
bring up those principles because that speaks a lot to who you are. And I feel like you're going to be an excellent counselor or a social worker or whatever path you decide to go down. I appreciate your balanced perspective. And it's really nice to consider the fact that, yeah, if people disagree or if they're on different sides of issues, they can still find common ground if they stay calm, if they don't attack each other, if they instead come at these conversations from a balanced perspective and validating the human being on the other side of that line. So, with that being said, I want to ask you two more questions. The first one is this: Marcos, when you think about the remainder of your time in school and the infinite number of possibilities about where your studies can take you, what are some things that you still want to learn more about? And partially, I'm asking you this because I would love to speak to you again and have you back on the podcast. So, what are some other topics that you've been curious about that you want to learn more about? And what can we dive into together next time?
I think what I'd love to dive into more about next time um, would be some of the tropes about
Mm,
the conspiracy community. There's quite a few habits that we have here, and it can get kind of repetitive, but
mm,
also if you can kind of point them out and make sense of them, it'll help you to be better able to manage all the information coming in and each of the various themes. Um, Although, of course, you could always just connect it to it yourself. But I
mm,
mean, the problem with that is, well, you're going to be flooded with information
mm.
that you have to put together by hand again.
Right.
So, but being able to present that, I mean, I could do that. Uh, that is kind of more on my expertise side. But
Definitely.
when it comes to learning new things, I think for new things, I would need to maybe look more into the way that people understand or make use of Asian styles of
Mm,
spirituality. The chakra system came from Indian spirituality, so would love to go back into that. Going into Qigong, and then also talking about some of the other stuff like archetypes and how they go into Hermeticism and
mm,
Kabbalah,
mm,
and the way occultists associate themselves with the Jewish community and the Christian community, which is
mm.
surprising considering that, although Gnosticism and occultism and Hermeticism in general seems to be such a uh, more different branch of spiritual beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
quite a few of the people I met who believe in these systems interact and hold to Christian beliefs.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it seems like Christianity can play a central role in many different ideologies, even those that seem to be opposed to each other. It's very interesting to see those parallels and those connections. With your talents and your background, it would be interesting to psychoanalyze the conspiracy community to kind of pick up on those patterns of behavior that might get us into trouble or might prevent more of an open dialogue between ourselves or between the conspiracy community and those that do not subscribe to these ideas. Marcos, this conversation has been fascinating. And while we only have one more question, we only have time for one more question. I do want to say once again that I'm looking forward to doing another podcast with you. As many as you would like, you're welcome back anytime. A very cool perspective on life. So my last question for you is this. If you could think back to your past self, so you could think back to who you were yesterday, who you were last week, last month, last year, or last decade, however far back you want to go, what message would you give to your past self? Some piece of advice or some piece of guidance? How would you help your past self in this moment now?
I would tell myself the counsel that your relationships are based off of your past. And although you can't change that your relationships, the way you start them, have a lot to do with your past. And although you know that your past is kind of difficult, you're going to make the most of it, and you're going to make it mean something. You're going to make it mean something, and you're going to make stability from where there is instability or difficulty.
I love that, Marcos. It's really fascinating because at the end of our lives, what we're going to think about the most when we're on our deathbeds is not necessarily how much money is in our bank account or what kind of car we are driving, but I do believe it'll be what were the relationships that we had the opportunity to experience? What did they teach us? And how might we go back and do things differently if there was a relationship that didn't go so well? So I think you've offered the audience a lot of inspiration and a lot of different directions that they could go in between Qigong, listening to Jordan Peterson, reading Carl Jung, looking into witchcraft, astrology. We've covered a lot of cool topics today, especially all of the COVID pandemic discussion, which I'm happy we were able to get into. But once again, Marcos, I'm looking forward to having you on again. It would be awesome to set something up in the future. So can you please let people know if they want to get into contact with you? What's a good way to reach out to you? And can you let people know where to find you?
My Instagram handle is Trusted Source 444. Trusted Source 444. And my email is 3 Marcos. That's Marcos. 3 Marcos 3 Revilla 3. Revilla is spelled Revilla. So yeah, 3 Marcos 3 Revilla 3 at gmail.com.
Excellent, folks. That'll all be in the show notes, of course. And like I said earlier, I'm looking forward to doing it again sometime in the future. So thanks again for being here with us, Marcos. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, man.
You too, man.
Peace. Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for being here on episode number 5. This is a fantastic conversation with Marcos. Gotta give him a big thanks once again. He has reached out to me through Instagram, just started chatting with me, and here we are now making an episode together. So that's really why I wanted to start this podcast, was to open my door to anyone who wants to have a calm, rational discussion. And that's exactly what Marcos brought to us today. Really appreciate his balanced perspective to criticize the conspiracy community so that we can be better, so that we can think more critically, be less reactionary, and guide ourselves through more of reason and less about emotionally reacting to everything. I think it's really solid advice there. So wishing you the absolute best, Marcos. I know you're busy in school at this moment, so hope everything's going well down there. And that's ironic, I know you're from Texas. I'll be flying out tomorrow morning to visit Dallas, Texas. Never been there before. Excited to go see some friends. Also, at the time of this recording, I want to give a quick shout out. If you're listening, thank you, Brandon from the Expanding Reality podcast. We had a cool discussion last night. I'll be letting you guys know when that's out. Could be a couple weeks from now, but really looking forward to hearing our discussion. And I also, once again, want to thank the entire community, all the different podcasters doing their thing, chatting us on Telegram. We have a lot of cool threads going on right now, whether it's the Weaving Spiders Welcome chat or the Innerverse podcast or the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy chat. We have a lot of cool discussions going on. It's really great to be a part of them. So thanks for the invite, guys. And lastly, as I always do, I want to leave you with this message. So for all you listening, wherever you are, be here, be now, and be you.